Hi guys, in this video we are going to look into the recent trends in Australia's current account, and when I'm recording this it is dated 2021, so we are looking into 2019 and 2020 kind of trend. Okay, and first is the merchandise balance or the goods balance. Okay, Australia's exports of goods and goods basically are affected by what we call two things here. One is the changes in commodity prices. Okay, now 80% of Australians' exports are mostly commodities such as iron ore, coal, LNG, gold, wheat, and wool. Right, and we know that merchandise balance, or we know that exports value, or whatever we are recording it under balance of payment, right, as value is basically the price of exports times the quantity of exports, right? So basically how big your export will be, it is affected by your quantity and your price together. Okay, now here it is trying to say that the commodity prices is basically, if there is a change in commodity prices, it is going to affect Australia exports value. Now, in this case, we are looking into a supply and demand kind of a situation. Supply, demand, right? Now, here it says that once there is a world economic growth increases, everybody is producing more and more things, and that itself will actually encourage a higher demand of the commodity, right? So we see that D1 will move to the right as demand curve shifts to the right. And that itself, we see that quantity demanded actually increases, right? The quantity in the market increases. Now, on the other hand, we see that the price have actually increases. Okay, as long as world economic growth is strong, it is going to increase the demand of commodity and therefore increase the commodity prices and making the exports price to be higher. Okay, now commodity prices is going to affect mostly your exports, okay, because Australia mostly exports commodity, but importing will be more on the intermediate goods, so it's not affected so much on the importing price. Okay, and we see that once export price increases, then your export value will increase. So ceteris paribus, keeping your quantity of exports unchanged, Australians' exports increase. Okay, now that's the first thing that is going to affect the merchandise trade. Okay, that is the price of the commodity. And the second one will be the domestic economic growth. Now, the first one, the changes in commodity prices mainly affect the exports. But here, the next one is domestic economic growth. When we talked about domestic economic growth, we are looking into more of the imports. Okay, when you look into domestic economic growth, we are looking at how rich or how increase in your income of your citizen have affected the imports, right? Now, if you have a high rate of economic growth, definitely you see that your people are getting more national income. So you will see that demand for imports actually increase. If you become richer, you would definitely want to buy more of imports. Okay. Now, normally increase in imports because of economic growth, right? And this is normally caused by two things. One is that once your economic growth is very high, and people will think that, or there are more and more people will be doing investments because it is more positive looking in your economy. So they will try to increase investment into your economy because you have been doing well in your economy, and therefore you will be importing more intermediate goods, meaning computer, equipment, all that stuff, or what we call the capital goods. Sorry, intermediate goods is more like things that you haven't finished producing, but you're going to buying more intermediate goods so that you can finish producing it, as well as capital goods like computers, machines, and all that. So one is that it will actually due to increase in economic growth will increase the investment inflow or investment itself in general, and therefore increasing the imported goods of intermediates and capital goods. Or second will be just the national incomes. People are generally become richer when the economic growth is high, and that increases more of consumer goods demand for imports. More imports of the consumer goods. Maybe people want to buy more luxurious handbag, so you will see that there is a higher imports value. Please keep in mind that domestic economic growth will only affect import but not the exports. In the long run, yes, they are going to increase exports. But in this case, generally, you just talk about the import. Okay, and current merchandise trade in Australia, how has that been? In 2020, we see that the economics activity has contracted, and it basically experienced a recession because of COVID-19. And we know that then, because of the decrease in economic activity, decrease in GDP, and that itself will decrease your imports, right? Imports demand, therefore getting the net trade balance to decrease. Okay, meaning it is more negative now because of the imports decreasing. Net trade balance decrease. Yes, that's right. Okay, now cyclical nature of goods and services balance. Basically, that's one. Actually, net trade balance increased because trade balance equal to export minus imports. If your imports is actually declining, holding export unchanged, your generally trade balance will actually be increasing. Okay. Now that is the case because of COVID-19. Therefore, the economic activity is affected. Okay. Now next is services balance. We have tourism. Right, tourism, basically most of it, Australians have been recording a deficit of it. By the saying deficit of it, it means that there are more tourists coming into Australia and traveling as tourists into Australia, right? And again, Australia is relatively isolated from the rest of the world, so the freight of it, so what it means here is the transport cost is relatively a large debit item, meaning people who come in to Australia's or people who go out from Australia, they basically pay a lot for the transport costs. And in COVID-19, basically the travel restriction has imposed by Australia. You cannot simply go into Australia, and that itself has actually discourages, right, foreigners going into Australia and travel. So we see that Australia's services exports is a surplus position, meaning the imports of tourism has actually decreased. So by holding export constant, in this case, we can see that the trade balance for services actually could be increasing. Okay. Now, another thing that we are paying attention to other than tourism is education. Okay, Australia's biggest exports services are education and travel and tourism. Right now, education was ranked as 4th most important export earners for Australia. Now, what happened is that it is very good for Australia since Australia is closer to the East Asia, and we know that East Asia populous region. Okay, it means that there are a lot of population, there are a lot of people there, and once the neighboring country like China, Singapore, Malaysia, they are all rising middle income people, right? You see that people are getting richer. It means that Australia's education sectors can do even better because more people or more citizens in those countries will opt to actually go to Australia and do their studies. So that itself could actually increase Australia's education exports. Okay, now next is income payment. Income payment basically means that how much Australia has paid out to its investor. Now keep in mind that there are a lot of investment inflow into Australia, and Australia has been depending on the investments done by overseas people, right? Overseas investors. So in another word, Australia rely a lot on investment inflow. Okay, so in another words, if there is an increase in investments, foreign investment inflow into Australia, your income payment as a result is going to increase. If there are more investment, mean you have to pay back the interest payment more. So in another word, Australian income payments is very much depending on how much foreign investment inflow is like. And Australia's economy, if Australia's economy is growing strong, companies will have higher profits and dividend, and these dividends and profit will be paid out as income payment, right, to the other country, which you will see that in your primary income will become more and more deficit because it's a debit entry. right? However, in 2019, we see that there is a decrease in economic growth of Australia, right? Because of one thing is the muted growth of I would say muted growth of Australia's economy in general in 2019 already, even before COVID-19 hits. Okay, there's a whole series of China and US trade war, the after effect, as well as people being pessimistic. And in 2020, it's even worse because of the pandemic, right? And that is as well as the bushfire in 2019, the end of 2019. And that itself actually has discouraged foreign investment inflow into Australia's. Okay, so then we know that once Australian economic growth is low or is slow, foreign investments into Australia becoming lesser. Okay, and then once foreign investment into Australia is decreasing, meaning your financial account, the inflow of finance actually decrease. On the other hand, in your current account for your income payment paid out to other country also decrease because there are lesser investment inflow. So you have to pay out lesser as a return of using their funds. Okay, so we see that there is a decrease in income payment in Australia. Okay, now let's look at this very nice little graph here. Basically, the trade balance fluctuates from surplus to deficit. Okay, now here we are going to look into how to read this graph. I think I will do it in your tutorial to understand this graph and how about it is for this. Now, generally, this is the trend and the explanation of the trend of how Australia's current account has been. And if you are given a chance to write an essay about Australia's current account, the structure, please remember to always put in the trend of the current trend of how Australia's is like, and probably the composition of trade, meaning your whatever is in your chapter 3 can also be used to written down inside your essay. Okay, that's it for my pre-recorded lecture. I hope you will listen this before my tutorial starts. That's it.